Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Hello, everybody. It is Wednesday, the 12th of February. I'm a little bit late doing the pod this week because I have just had stuff flying at me from every which direction. So welcome back for regular listeners and hello to new listeners. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, I've had a challenging few days. I've had some car trouble. My dog had some seizures. I've got a broody chicken, which is just an enormous faff. And I've been helping to take down a shed which I've been given which needed completely dismantling and then transporting over to the plot. And then, well, it hasn't even been put up yet, but it will get put up yet. So I'm a little bit behind the curve. But what I have been thinking about all the time is seeds, because it's the middle of February and here in the UK, everybody is itching to get started with seeds. Now, I know some people have started already. They're doing the chilies and possibly even sweet peas, but I don't start anything till the beginning of March. And although I have got electricity out in my greenhouse, and therefore I could technically put things on heated mats and get going, I don't like to do it. And the reason is because it's not just about the heat, it's also about light levels. Now, it's been incredibly murky in the UK for what feels like forever, actually, but the last few weeks, certainly, we've had one day of bright sunshine. And the rest of the time, it's just really dark and murky. So, even assuming that things germinate, they're going to poke their heads up out of the soil and it's just going to be dark. And what I don't want is really long, leggy little seedlings that are just reaching for the light, and you just end up with these horrible, thin, weak little stems. So I would much rather just wait until the beginning of March and then I can crack on with it. So the first question is, why are we all storing seed anyway? Like, why would we not just go to the shops or go online and buy fresh seed every year? Well, there are lots of reasons why we do it. One of them is that some of the packets of seed have thousands of seeds in. We often don't get through them. Now, I'm not saying we should be saving seed up for years, because that's one of my don'ts for today's session, but sometimes you just can't get through all of the seeds in a packet and you end up just storing some for the next year. You might also collect lots of seed from your own flowers in your own garden, and then again decide that you're going to sow them next year and then not get around to it. So perhaps you're going to store them for another year. You might be given seed by friends or family members, or you could go to a seed swap and pick something up. Storing seed is a great way of saving yourself money, because the more that you can grow from seed, ideally your own, or if you have to buy it, then you've only spent a couple of pounds per packet. But that's a great way of saving money rather than having to buy full-size plants, or even thinking that you need to buy packs of small plants that you could really easily sow yourself. I'm always amazed when I go to garden centres and I see people buying trays and trays of sweet peas and cosmos, because they're about the easiest thing to sow. And you think, why would you spend £6 or more per tray for something that you can just do yourself? It doesn't make any sense. And also, if you have a change in circumstances, like you're moving your house, then you might well want to save seed before you go. Now, I know some people dig their plants up and take them with them when they move, but not everybody does that, and you might not want to. And if you're comfortable with sowing seed and confident, then you could just take seeds at the end of the year. So the most important thing really with storing seed is that you collect it in the correct way and at the correct time, and you dry it properly and label it. So there is masses of information online about the do's and don'ts for how to store seed, which I will discuss in a minute. But I think the most important thing is to collect your seed on a dry day. The worst thing you can do really is go out and be collecting seeds when they're wet, because especially the ones that are in sort of papery casings, if they're wet, you just have to go to the time and the effort of drying them out on pieces of kitchen towel or toilet paper on trays, vaguely near radiators, so that they're absolutely bone dry before you put them away. And it's very important that you label everything at the time. Don't think for one moment that you will remember what it is and go back to it. No, you must label everything properly when you collect it. So the don'ts for storing seed are: don't store it unlabeled, don't store it in bright light or in damp conditions or in very hot temperatures. Don't store it somewhere where it's at risk of being eaten by mice or rats or anything else that could take a fancy to it. Don't store it in a humid environment unless it's in an airtight container. Don't store it in the fridge unless, again, it's in an airtight container, because fridges are very moist. And don't really store it in the fridge unless you're cold stratifying it, which is a process where you're basically replicating what nature does. So a period of cold, damp conditions, which some seeds really like. Don't store it anywhere that suffers from condensation, again, damp, or around air vents where you could have temperature fluctuations. And also don't store it for years and years. So I was running a seed swap for my local horticultural society last year, and we were very generously gifted some seeds from a lady who'd kept them since 1992. And surprisingly, they weren't very popular, because that is rather a long time to have kept them. And of course, we don't know how they've been stored, because that is quite a long period of time as well. So I'm sure someone will gamely have a go with them, but you have to understand that your germination rate could be zero or close to zero after you've had them for that long. So do store them in an airtight container once they are fully dry. So that could be a mason jar, Ziploc bag, freezer bag, paper bag, but they then need to go somewhere dark. So the golden rule really is that they need to be dry, cold, and dark. So they could go perhaps in the garage or in a shed, assuming that nothing can eat them, or perhaps, even put them under the bed or put them in a wardrobe, as long as it doesn't get damp or you've got moths in there. And whatever you do, make sure that you have labeled everything correctly. So if you're new to growing from seed as well, my tip would be to avoid seeds which are tricky to germinate. So that could be things that require cold stratification, for example. So that is long periods of cold or moist, or perhaps even alternative temperatures during the process. So basically replicating what happens out in nature. But if you're trying to do that in a controlled environment, it's really, really tricky. So things like allium purple sensation have these lovely seeds, and you think, oh yeah, I might have a go with those. Tricky. So, I mean, by all means, have a go, but you might find it's easier just to buy the bulbs for those. Also, if you're a novice, you may not wish to jump straight into seeds which require smoke or fire to break the dormancy. So some plants that grow in South Africa, for example, there are some pine cones that are actually triggered into germination by fire and smoke. Might be a little bit outside your comfort zone. And the other thing to be aware of is the speed or the rate of germination. And this varies according to the plant. So some things, you'll sow them and literally a couple of days later, they're up and that's it, they're off. Other things, parsley can take weeks and weeks. And so it's just worth bearing that in mind. Maybe put even a special little note in the tray to be patient, so that you don't just think after a couple of weeks, oh, nothing's happened, and throw the whole lot away. Or worse still, tip the compost in that tray back into your general use compost bin, that the seeds are still in there. And then you mix the compost up, you use them for another tray, and then you've got two different things growing. So just be aware of that. Okay, something else to think about is seed compost. Now, you might be thinking about getting prepared for sowing your seeds and thinking, do I need a seed compost? And if so, which one? Well, the thing to know in general about using a seed compost is you've got to take three things into consideration, or four if you're going to factor in cost. So the first is nutrient levels. The second is aeration. And the third is moisture retention. And those are the three things that are basically going to determine the medium that you grow your seeds in. Now, I'm not a fan of conventional seed compost, and that's for a number of reasons, one of which is cost. And the other is that sometimes I find it's just too sandy. And I just resent buying a bag of something that's basically like buying a bag of sharp sand. The good thing about it is, of course, it's low in nutrients. And that's important because your seeds are basically containing everything that they need to get going. So while they're germinating, while they're just starting off, they don't need a compost that's high in nutrients. It's completely pointless and it's just a waste. So you do want to have a seed compost that's low in nutrients and that is also quite aerated, because you want the seeds to be able to get oxygen into their roots. And you want something that is not really moisture retentive. It does need to be free draining. So you don't want something that's 100% sand and the water's just going to run straight through it. But at the other hand, you don't want to have something that's going to be holding lots of moisture around the roots, because there is a risk that they will not get enough oxygen and that they can also rot off. So I make up my own mixture. And that's because I've been sowing seeds for years. So I've kind of worked out what works and what doesn't work. And I do think it is trial and error. So I do think you should practice with lots of different techniques and find what works for you. So I use old compost and I mix it with perhaps a little tiny bit of new compost, just a multi-purpose, but a really small amount. And I nearly always throw in a bit of vermiculite as well, just to lighten it up a little bit. I don't like using grit because, again, it's expensive and it just adds to the weight of all of the pots, whereas vermiculite is lovely and light. Now, don't use your best homemade compost. It's far too rich, so that's a waste. And you have to get this balance right between light and airy, but at the same time, the roots do need to be able to grab hold of the compost. So you don't want them just floating around in this airy compost. And the water retentiveness of it. So you don't want them rotting off, but you also need them to be able to have access to water. And once I pop them on, my seedlings, I will actually incorporate some of the soil that they're going to end up in their pots. So it's like introducing them, I suppose. It's like weaning them off seed compost, putting them onto this sort of starter food that isn't 100% soil, but there is a mix of soil in there. Because what I find with mine is, if they're going out in the field, you don't want them to go out excuse me, you don't want them to go out there and just have a total heart attack when they get out there and they think, oh my god, what is this material that I'm now sat in? I don't like it, or it makes me really uncomfortable. And I have seen it happen. You do put them out, some things I've put out and they've just completely panicked. So I like to mix a bit of soil in to basically get a loamy compost, so that they can just kind of get a handle on what they're doing. Be careful if you go and buy loamy soils from a garden centre or home base or somewhere. They've sterilised them. So there's nothing alive. There's nothing, I don't think, anything beneficial at all left in them. What you're paying for is the structure. So you'd be better off going to dig a hole in your garden or wherever these guys are going to end up, lift some of the soil, and then mix that into your compost. But as I say, this isn't to start off with. This is when they get potted on into something else. So I hope that helps. And I hope you don't feel like you need to go out and buy seed compost. You can make your own up. Just make sure it's nice and light and airy and not too rich, and yeah, just not soggy. And I'm sure your seeds are going to absolutely love it. Okay, well, that is me for today. I hope you found that useful. I'll be back in a couple of days. In the meantime, do please subscribe if you like what you hear and you'd like to be updated as soon as the latest episode comes out. And I will catch you soon.